To the Middle East, though, now, and Hamas says it will now study the new Gaza peace plan presented by Donald Trump and signed off by Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu on Monday in Washington. The group says it will talk with other Palestinian factions before responding, and Hamas figures within Gaza and those living outside the Strip might not share the same perspectives. With an outline of the plan they'll be studying, this from France 24's Ellen Gainsford.
Under Donald Trump's 20-point plan for peace in Gaza, the first step would be an immediate ceasefire. Hamas would then have 72 hours to free all hostages. 48 hostages remain in Gaza, at least 25 of whom are believed to be deceased. In return, Israel would free 250 Palestinian prisoners and 1,700 Gazans detained since the start of the conflict. The plan would see Israeli forces perform a gradual, staggered retreat from Gaza. Initially, the Gaza Strip would be governed by a technocratic, apolitical Board of Peace, made up of Palestinians and international experts, directed and presided over by US President Donald Trump. The former British Prime Minister Tony Blair would also play a part in this organization. Hamas would be banned from any role in governing Gaza, while Hamas members would benefit from an amnesty if they disarm and agree to peacefully coexist with Israel. The framework includes plans to invest in Gaza and rebuild the devastated territory. As soon as the text is signed, access for humanitarian aid would be restored, overseen by bodies including the United Nations and the Red Cross. An international stabilization force with the backing of Arab states would keep the peace. In the long term, the Palestinian Authority would be allowed to take control of governing the territory after certain reforms, and the plan leaves the door open for an eventual Palestinian state. But if Hamas rejects the plan or does not follow through, Trump says Israel would then have US backing to, quote, finish the job of destroying the threat of Hamas.
And Qatar says it is holding talks with Hamas negotiators and mediators from Turkey today to discuss that plan. Well, for more on all this, I'm now joined on the line from London by Yossi Mekelberg, who is a senior consulting fellow at the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House think tank in London. First of all, thank you for your time, Mr. Mekelberg. We're very pleased to welcome you to the programme. I want to start with where we are now. Today, of course, the focus is on Hamas. Do you think they will agree to this plan? Is it going to be seen as a surrender?
Good afternoon. Thank you for having me. It's now the ball is in Hamas court, whether they agree to accept the deal or not. But we have also to remember that while Netanyahu accepted in principle the deal, it's not so sure how he will go in and see that when he's going back to Israel, because he has a position there. But Hamas says, I'm not so sure it can be regarded as surrender, but in many ways there are incentives, and comes with that also keeping it relevant within a Palestinian political system.
You talked a little there about the Israeli side, and I think I'm right in saying a majority across the political spectrum look set to back this plan. But those ultranationalists, some of them, of course, propping up Netanyahu's government, are still fiercely opposed to it. Can he persuade them? And does that matter anymore, whether he persuades them?
Again, he doesn't have necessarily to persuade them, because he has a majority within the Israeli parliament in order to pass any decision like this, and also within the cabinet. What might be the case, he won't convince the ultra-nationalists, the messianic elements within his government. He chooses we sit with them in government. He will have to deal with them. But what might happen that if they decided to leave government, he still has a majority in the Knesset, majority in cabinet, and then he might decide to call early election sometimes in early 2026. That's the question. At the end of the day, we always need to remember Netanyahu will have the calculation what's best for him to survive in power. But he will be under immense pressure from the Trump administration and from the rest of the international community not to divert from what he agreed yesterday.
And precisely on what he agreed yesterday, after that appearance in the Oval Office with Donald Trump in English, Netanyahu then recorded a separate video in Hebrew for Israelis that he posted on social media. And in that video, he makes it clear that he remains opposed to a Palestinian state. Now, the actual plan he has agreed doesn't include a Palestinian state, of course, but it does talk about creating a credible pathway to self-determination and statehood. Let's take a listen to what he said.
It's not written in the agreement, but one thing was made clear. We will strongly oppose a Palestinian state. President Trump said that he understands it, and he also made it clear that such a move would grant a huge price to terrorism and endanger the state of Israel. And of course, we do not agree on that.
A lot's being made of this, the fact that Netanyahu seemed to have one attitude in the Oval Office and then appeared to have a slightly different attitude talking to the Israeli people. But does it really matter? Because it seems that neither Netanyahu nor Trump is likely to be in office by the time any state is going to be seriously discussed. Everything, first of all, depends on the success of this very short term, this interim arrangement, if indeed that is agreed by Hamas.
You're absolutely right. I think, first of all, we need to look at the first steps. And the first steps that are very important is the end of this horrific war, see the hostages returning, the release of many Palestinian detainees, also prisoners, humanitarian aid entering on adequate quantities into Gaza. So I think this is the immediate to relieve the terrible humanitarian disaster, allow the hostages to go back to that, some normalcy to start there. Now, then you need to reboot completely the relations between the Israelis and the Palestinians, what happens in Gaza. As far as I understand, the 20-point talk quite explicitly about Palestinian self-determination and a Palestinian state after reform within the Palestinian Authority, which means two-state solution. And Netanyahu can say whatever like, but he has said he accepted. Is he going to try to derail something like this? I expect him to do so. That's what Netanyahu is doing. What he said yesterday in the White House is very different, diametrically opposite to what he said only a few days ago to the United Nations General Assembly. But as you heard, neither Trump nor Netanyahu are going to stay in power forever. I think while Trump is moving towards agreeing to the idea of two-state solution, Netanyahu doesn't have even politically the bandwidth to agree with that. So we expect to see what happened in the next election, unless Israel moving towards accepting that the only way to guarantee its security, its well-being, its prosperity in the long time is two-state solution, then unfortunately we'll keep seeing the conflict erupts time and again.
You talked there about aid coming into Gaza. This is part of, the timetable of events. Aid, unlimited aid, would go in, including temporary homes being built very quickly. So we thought we'd take a quick look at what some Palestinians are saying about this. We can hear some of their views now. These are people in the Gaza Strip. Take a listen.
This plan falls in Trump and Israel's favor. They have interests in Gaza. They want to end Gaza in any way possible. For gas, they want to turn Gaza into Trump resorts, and he wants to finish his plan.
Trump promised yesterday that there will be peace. He said there will be peace and the hostages will be released. But we as Palestinian citizens, where are we in this equation? Who's going to solve our situation? Who's going to save us from these Zionist crimes? Who's going to save us?
If they release all the hostages at once, then we're finished. We're completely done. And this story of handing over the hostages while they'll still occupy Gaza and Trump is planning how to take a hold and turn it into resorts and tourist areas, that's crazy.
I think we should stress, that it's very difficult for people to speak freely in Gaza, where everything is controlled by Hamas. But nevertheless, it is very striking there. There's very little optimism. What do you make of it?
I can't blame anyone that is not optimistic right now in Gaza. The hell that they've been going through in the last 2 years. 66,000 people killed, the devastation, the starvation, all of it. It's for Israel, it's for its own leadership, the Palestinian leadership, it's for the international community to convince that there is a better future for Gazan people after this horrific 2 years. And the plan talks about the reconstruction of Gaza and funds and the peace board and all of this. This is kind of the long term. Everyone knows this will take a long time, quite a few years to rebuild Gaza. But at least the Gazan people need to see at least the beginning of it. First with immediate humanitarian aid, and then getting Palestinians involved in the process of rebuilding Gaza. One of the things that's missing from this plan is how organically leadership emerges within how to help it to emerge within Gaza and the wider Palestinian society. How Palestinians are the one that actually going to dictate their own destiny, and this is missing. It talks much about Israel's security, but not as much about Palestinian security. It has to be acknowledged that at the end of the day, only when there are two viable political systems there, in Israel and the Palestinians, that enjoys exactly the same right, then both people can move forward.
It's true that in the plan, the idea is to have this technocratic, apolitical, as we heard in our piece at the top there, organisation to run civil affairs, to run public services, another international stability force for peacekeeping, a police force of some kind. And all of this, above all of this, is to be a board of peace, a so-called board of peace. Donald Trump to chair that, and to, a lot of people's surprise, Tony Blair is the other name. The former UK Prime Minister Tony Blair has been the only other person mentioned as someone likely to be on this board. What are your views on Trump's role as president of the Board of Peace, and particularly Tony Blair's involvement?
We know that Trump doesn't have much of attention span to follow something like this closely. He even sort of admitted this yesterday in the press conference. I mean, it's more sending a message that the United States is behind it, and the leader of the United States is behind it. So I think it's important to show commitment on the American side. But in the end time, I think what is important, that what is now seen as the interim, what is suggested as the interim, won't become permanent. But otherwise, it will be seen as some sort of neo-colonialism if the governing body comes from the West. As for Tony Blair, whenever Tony Blair will be suggested, it will cause some controversy because his involvement in Iraq. But at the same time, he also brings a lot of experience. I think he's genuine when he wants to, contribute. He has gravitas. He has the support of many Gulf states that if he's involved, probably they would like to support such an endeavor. Every leader that's been 10 years as prime minister probably will come with some baggage, some better than others. But if he's ready and is capable to make a difference there for Gaza, I don't think it should be excluded.
And of course, quite successful with the Northern Ireland peace process back in 1998. Trump, it seems very committed to this, certainly for now. As you say, he has a short attention span. How much do you think he sort of twisted Netanyahu's arm here to get this thing through?
I think it's enough to see the difference between the Netanyahu speech to the UN General Assembly on last Friday and what he's ready to say that he accepts. Whether he's trying to derail it or not, time will tell. Shows everyone, demonstrates that there was some twisting in the process. The speech on Friday was very militant, defiant, talking about basically calling the entire international community cowards for recognizing a Palestinian state, for not joining in the war against fundamentalism. And he was way more sheepish when he was stood next to Donald Trump and accepting a plan that he knows that will cause him trouble with his own coalition. And large part of it, he didn't support himself. So you assume that something happened during their meeting.
In terms of Netanyahu's personal future, one of the terms of this deal was the idea of amnesty for Hamas figures, Israel agreeing not to hunt them down. What about the international arrest warrant for Netanyahu? You know, the ICC aren't going to simply drop that, are they?
I mean, this is probably will be part of the negotiation, who is getting amnesty for what. But I think for us, the most important thing at this stage is to ensure that the first stages of this ceasefire, happening, to see the end of the war, to see the hostages back, to see humanitarian aid. You know, when then it comes to justice and restorative justice, I think this will have to wait for the next stages. We also know anything, again, also for Israel, is to see an election as quickly as possible that will see, in any case, the end of Netanyahu's political career. I really believe that he caused enough damage to the state of Israel and the Palestinians and the region, and it's time for him to go and leave the political stage.
I'm afraid we're out of time there. We're going to have to leave it there. Yossi Mekelberg of the Middle East and North Africa programme at Chatham House think tank in London. Thank you so much for your time.